thank you.
Okay, tell us a little bit of your background and how it all got started, and all the things you're juggling right now too. Now that you're in North Florida, it's a lot easier, right?
Yeah.
Atlanta, right?
Definitely, yeah, prefer it here. First of all, thank you. It's an honor to get to be here, talk to you. And I'm in this moment in my life and career where God's calling me out of chasing dollars, but I'm not quite out yet. We have 3 businesses. I'll talk about one mainly today. I'm almost out of the real estate business, and I have a health and longevity business that is an artifact of, I had cancer twice, and just felt like I learned a lot of things that might help other people. So that's called Plus Years, and I don't know that I'll get out of that business because it helps so many people, but I'll talk about my main business that I started 30 years ago, which is a software company. But so I'll share, when we moved here during the pandemic, God really started to work on my heart that, He had prepared me for something that I was too dumb to see for a long time, and He kept hitting me with the 2x4 in the head until I finally got the picture. So I'll share about that today. But just honored to get to be with you. And I've met some of you before. I've heard you sing and seen you at Life Work, and I think we met and maybe even had a phone conversation about the prayer breakfast. So anyway, it's good to be with you all. So I'll just tell my story, and then as we did last time. So I did not grow up in a Christian home. We weren't atheists, but we were anti-religion. I grew up, my parents were divorced, grew up in my mom's home, and I can just remember every time some big name evangelist fell, it was a big focus. It was, see, look at the hypocrites. And we were kind of taught that to be self-reliant, that if you were going to get something in this world, you had to rely on yourself, and kind of the, if it is to be, it's up to me attitude. And my grandfather was a self-made, very successful guy, World War II, kind of the greatest generation, was in Pearl Harbor on a ship that got bombed, started in the paint department at Sears after the war to support my grandmother and their family, worked his way all the way up to be the CEO of Sears Roebuck in the 70s. And so he was sort of my picture of what,
what a software company would look like. Right?
Yeah, maybe. What a man was supposed to be. But, just sort of hardworking, self-reliant. That was what my image was. And so I spent my young years trying to, I was the woman at the well, and I didn't know it because I didn't know that story, but I was using the things of the world to try to fill this God-shaped hole. And for me, it was academics and athletics, and any achievement I could get, I was in pursuit of, and I was performing. I didn't know. Years later, somebody asked me, "Who are you performing for?" And
that's a good question.
Yeah, it is spend some time thinking about that question. Obviously we know as Christians what the answer should be. But I was early as a Christian, and I realized that all these years I was performing for my grandfather, who had long since passed. But all the achievements I was trying to stack up for myself were in an effort to please him and make him, proud of me. So as a result, I was a pretty good student. I ended up getting into engineering school at Georgia Institute of Technology, and my family felt like felt like it was I was the only person from my generation to go to college, and my family felt like I should pay for my college, so that I would appreciate it more, and I would take it more seriously if I had to pay for it. So I worked at the Coca-Cola company across the street from Georgia Tech, which is a wonderful company, an amazing place to learn. And by the way, Coca-Cola is a sponsor for the First Coast Prayer Breakfast on October the 6th. A Christian event, which is wonderful for them to sponsor. So I worked at the Coca-Cola company, and what I learned is that I was not made for large companies. And as I looked around, I realized I didn't want to sell, and nothing against Coca-Cola, it's a wonderful place. But I didn't want to, at the end of the line 40 years later, say I sold sugar water for a living. I wanted to do something more impactful. And along the way, I had cancer. So I had cancer at 18 years old. And again, I was not yet a Christian. You would think that something like that would get your attention. I told this story the last time, and I apologize, Sandra, you've heard it too. But so I was in the hospital, and I had just had surgery, and cancer is a scary thing. And so I'm 18, and my parents are there, my grandparents are there.
Yeah.
And the surgeon walks in the room, and of course you're waiting for the prognosis. You're waiting to hear what they're going to tell you, your future is. And so the surgeon walks in, and he had no business giving me or my parents my prognosis. That's the job of the oncologist. But he decides he wants to be the man of the hour. And he just walks in the room, and I can remember him leaning against the doorway and just shaking his head like this. And, implying to my family and to me, I'm sitting in this bed, that I wasn't going to make it. And
He said, "You're not going to make it?"
he just shook his head like this, and like it was bad news. And my mom passed out. I remember all the medical staff scurrying around my mom, and nobody would make eye contact with me.
Wow.
And you would think that would be a moment where I would be open to Jesus, but it didn't happen. That wasn't my moment. And so I sat in this bed, and everybody's scurrying around, and my grandfather disappeared. I had a magazine in my lap, I remember at the time, and it was open to an advertisement for a Ford Bronco. And so he said, "You want that?" He's thinking I'm dying, so I was like, "Yeah." So he leaves the hospital, and he goes to a Ford dealership, and he ends up buying a blue Ford Bronco that was on a lot. And in the 2 hours he was gone, the oncologist came in and said, "Are you kidding? This is the most curable kind of cancer you can have." And so he turns back up with the keys to this new blue Ford Bronco.
Shut up.
And,
Praise God.
Yeah. So the reason I tell that story is there's a blue Ford Bronco sitting in the parking lot. Yeah. I got cancer again. That was actually caused by the chemo from the first cancer. And it's similar, it's kind of a similar story. They didn't give me a great prognosis. It was kidney cancer caused by the chemo.
What kind of car did you get that time?
Blue Bronco. I said, if I make this, if I live through this one, I'm going to buy myself a blue Bronco. So that's what I did. And so anyway, so you would think a moment like that would get your attention. For Jesus, it didn't happen. And I lived in the Bible Belt, and I always tell people this. Nobody ever invited me to church as a kid. I don't, it's my story. It's just the way God worked out my story. But I lived in Atlanta in the Bible Belt, and, nobody invited me or my parents. Maybe they just thought we were too far gone. So they didn't invite us to church. But that moment, in spite of the fact that Jesus didn't enter my life at that moment, it was a formative moment because when you, at least for me, when you face your own mortality, certainly at that young of an age, you decide you're not going to waste a minute of the rest, whatever you have left. So I go off to Georgia Tech, and I continued to pursue approval, achievement. I wanted to impress, my family in particular, and I'm just chasing any achievement, accomplishment I could get. And similarly, on the Georgia Tech campus, there are 126 evangelical college ministries.
Wow.
126.
Wow.
I was approached
Georgia
by
Tech?
in the country, and many of them at Georgia Tech, but 0 approaches. Again, part of my story, but you know, I was never approached to go to church or come to be a part of a ministry, all those other things. So those are things that we as a family support significantly because of my own experience. Anyway, so I'm working at Coca-Cola. I'm at Georgia Tech, and I was majoring in industrial engineering. And there were software classes that you had to take as a part of your major, and I put them off till my very last. We were in quarters then. Put them off to my very last quarter because I was sure I would hate these classes. And so I took them in my last quarter, and I had already accepted a job to work full-time at Coca-Cola after I graduated. And I took these software classes, and I absolutely fell in love. It was the opposite of all the core engineering stuff, the calculus and the physics, and you're given a problem, you have to find the solution. With the software, in my view, it was they give you a solution, write a software that does X, and you got to go write the problem. And what was fascinating, not mine, was you could write the problem in increasingly efficient ways. And it was the only thing, other than chasing girls at the time, that I would stay up all night for. So I would stay up all night with these, and I would write and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite the solution to the problem. And I just was fascinated with software. Short of time travel, I thought you can do anything with software. So I had already accepted a job at Coke. I went to work for the Coca-Cola company, but I couldn't get this software thing out of my mind. And so about a little less than a year in, and maybe 9 months into my job at Coca-Cola, I had an idea for a company, a product, and I was naive enough to think I could, make it happen. I had married my best friend. She and I had been best friends since the 7th grade, inseparable, never dated, thank God, until after college. And she had a good job. So, as my mom would say, I quit a perfectly good paying job. My parents were big company people. My grandfather, 40 years at Sears, that kind of thing. So quitting the Coca-Cola company was a big deal to my family. To start a company, there were never any entrepreneurs in my family. Fortunately, as I said, my wife was working at Levi Strauss and had a good job. So I quit. I start this company, and it's working out of an apartment, that kind of early day stuff, and we begin to. And again, I'm not a Christian, and for me, my scoreboard shifted from academics and athletics to financial. So at that time, if you wanted to make a lot of money, you went into software. If you wanted to make a mountain of money, you started a software company. So that was my goal, and that was my exclusive goal. It was all about that scoreboard of I wanted to have a big pile of money, and I wanted to retire in my 20s to prove to all my friends that I'd been successful. And the company started, we started to get some success. We decided, and again, this was what you did at the time, if you wanted to grow super fast, you go raise private equity. So we went out to raise money, and the venture investors that invested in our business said, I'm not going to give this much money to somebody your age, so go get an adult. And and I hired a guy who ended up, as God's great irony, leading me to Christ. And honestly, I tell people, I would not have hired him had I known he was a Christian. Because remember, my impression of Christians were they're all weak. They need something to believe in since they can't believe in themselves. They're not smart, capable. But this was not this guy. He broke my stereotype of what a Christian was.
Amen.
And strong, capable, smart, logical, great engineer, great business guy. And after I hired him, I learned he was a Christian. And he would invite me to his Bible study, and he would invite me to his church, and he would leave books on my desk. He didn't push it down my throat. I always joke and say I have at least a dozen copies of More Than a Carpenter, because he wasn't the only person leaving books on my desk, and I was clearly, people could see that I was the woman at the well that needed living water, because I was using all the things, in spite of the fact that the company was having success and was building a family, and all the things that I thought would fill that God-shaped hole were not filling that hole, and I think people could see it. So I got lots of invitations to church, lots of invitations to Bible studies, and that had never happened before. But I had no time for it, no use for it. I would politely just decline the invitations. But then Rusty was the CEO I hired, said, hey, there's this thing called a prayer breakfast in Atlanta. It's a couple thousand people. You're not gonna have to pray out loud or anything like that. But this guy, Jimmy Blanchard, who founded Synovus Bank, is gonna speak. And he's gonna tell his life story. And this guy had built a really big, if you guys know Synovus, he had built a really big bank. And so I was ambitious. I wanted to hear this person's life story, even if there was some prayer involved. So I accepted the invitation. I went to this prayer breakfast, and there was a local speaker and a keynote speaker. And what I remember first of all, I remember trying to pick my seat near the back so I could exit when they started doing the forced healings, the Ernest Angley stuff from the stage. Yeah. So I'm at this thing, and these guys start telling their stories, and it was my story. It was the woman at the well story. The details varied, but it was basically, these are guys that had achieved all the things they thought would deliver contentment, and they didn't get it. And so they had tried other things, drugs, alcohol, affairs, more power, more money, bigger job, bigger titles, the club members, whatever it was, and it wasn't filling that gap. And then they met this Jesus, and while they weren't perfect, they found contentment. I was wrecked. And then they offered a prayer to receive Christ. That was not my moment. I was not ready, but I was wrecked because I thought, that's my life. These are these guys were telling my story. The details were a little different. So I decided I would read the Bible, do the year through the Bible thing. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't even tell my wife. I would get up extra early in the morning before anybody was awake. I would read the Bible, whatever the plan was for that day, and then I would pray. And I prayed the same prayer, and I'm so grateful for God's mercy, because I would pray, hey God, I don't think you're real, and if you are, I challenge you to show up in my life. And my goal, if I'm honest, my goal was to prove to this Rusty guy that I'd hired to be the CEO that he was a fraud and his God was a fraud, and that all this stuff these guys said from the stage was just make-believe. That's obviously not what happened. So about halfway through the year through the Bible, I had begun to notice a change that I could not explain. I hadn't seen, I didn't levitate or see white lights or anything like that, but I began to care about other people, which, if you knew me at the time, was pretty profound, especially my employees and their families. And we had employees all over the world by this point. And I really began to genuinely care about, and it wasn't just lip service. And it really, I took notice of it, because it was a big change for me, who was all focused on the pile of money and everything I could get for myself. And so the way my story goes, I was on a run in Ohio. My grandfather, this person I had mentioned earlier, passed away. And said, well, I know you got to go if you got to split. Nice meeting you. Okay, very nice.
You too, Bo.
Thanks.
I want to hear this.
Yeah.
Be overtime.
I'm at
Take
Help
care,
Joe.
Send your copy.
So I'm on this run, and my grandfather, the guy who had, the greatest generation guy, paint department to CEO of Sears, he was a Depression era guy who would never tell you he loved you, but he would show you. Just, men of that generation didn't cry, they didn't say I love you, they just.
Right.
but he would show you. And so I never knew if he was a Christian. And I was on this run, and running is not fun for me. I'm not built for it, but and so what I do is I try to do this thing and come up with anything to distract me from the run itself. So I was running through this scenario in my brain, and in this case, I decided I was going to write this speech of if I had 60 more seconds with my grandfather. I don't know why I'm so choked up today. If I had 60 more seconds with my grandfather, what I would tell him. And so I would rehearse in my brain, just to keep my mind off running, what I would tell him if I had 60 more seconds with him. And, I thought to myself, if there's a heaven, he's probably in it. Anyway, so I'm thinking, I'm re-rehearsing this speech, and while I'm running, I hear the audible voice of God say, you can tell him when you see him in heaven.
Jesus.
And it was a loud, audible voice, and I stopped, obviously, in the on my run, and I thought, was that God? Was that me? How did that happen? And I convinced myself it wasn't God. I convinced myself that it was me. So I picked up my run again and started to begin to rehearse that speech again. And as I approached this T intersection in the road, I heard it again. Loud, audible, clear voice of God. You can tell him when you see him in heaven. And so here I stood, literally in the crossroads of my life. The run would have taken me to the right. To the left was a cornfield. It was winter corn, so the corn was still up. And across this field was a little white country church with a steeple on top. And I stood there, and literally in a crossroads, and I decided that God had indeed shown up as I had challenged him to all those mornings. And I ran to that little country church, and as I shared the last time, I had these visions. It's just this little simple country church, with the double doors in the front. And I had this vision of, throwing open the doors and going in and getting on my knees, and as I'm running to this thing, and all dramatic. And it's like a Tuesday morning, and I get there and the doors are locked. So I just got on my knees in that parking lot, and I asked Jesus to forgive me, and invited him into my heart. And that was the beginning of my story. I was in my 30s. It was about 20 years ago. So that was the start for me, and what changed, and what John asked me to share is that sort of how did that affect my views on business and life and so on, and what did I learn from that? So I went back, and I'm an engineer, and so I pick up the book, and I'm like, okay, now this book's going to tell me how to run my business. And I started, if you remember, diagramming sentences in grammar school, that's what I'm doing with the Bible, like trying to find all the secrets and all the lessons, and here's how I'm supposed to run my business. And I'm sure my coworkers thought I was crazy as I'd come into meetings and I'd go, all right, this is what we're going to do now. And ultimately, it was just overwhelming trying to figure out how to run this business according to this Bible. And so I decided, all right, I got to simplify. And I decided there are two greats in the Bible, and that was a pretty good place to start. There are only two greats. They're called greats. They must be important. So I'm going to start with the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. Those are the two things I'm going to start with. And I'll say a word about Great Commission and come back to it. By this point, I had been invited to share my testimony from the stage of this prayer breakfast. And then I had been invited to MC this event. And then I was invited onto the board. And so this prayer breakfast became a really central part of my ministry, my personal ministry. I would use it to invite my coworkers to hear Woman at the Well stories from other speakers. So I'll come back to that. It played a huge role in sharing Jesus with my coworkers. But for the great commandment, love God, love people, I really dug into that, and I thought about how businesses operate, and I thought, so I'm private equity funded at this point, and there is enormous pressure. I don't know what it's like to run a public company, but I have multiple private equity investors at this point, and the pressure is enormous. And it's a really, really dark place, private equity. They take the smartest people in the world, truly, some of the smartest people in the world, that are, if you consider, they only hire number 1 or number 2 out of Harvard, Stanford, Yale. They would never hire anybody from Georgia Tech, they told me so. They would never hire number 3, yeah, that's how arrogant they are. But if you think about what it takes to be number 1 or number 2 at Harvard, you know, you're definitely the valedictorian of your high school. And to be the valedictorian of valedictorians, you're not just smart. There's a level of sacrifice you've had to have that corresponds to a level of ambition that's just not healthy. And then they take these people and they pay them tons of money and they put them in these private equity firms. Again, really, really smart people. But the way they've structured this is really smart. They compete these people against each other. Some of the most ambitious, smartest people in the world. And every Monday morning, every private equity firm has a partners meeting. And in many of those meetings, at least once a month, they're doing what's called mark to market, which is they're valuing every investment that their partners have made. And so imagine if we're a partnership of a private equity firm, we've all made investments, and every Monday morning or at least once a month, investments are put on the board and they're valued. And you're basically told how good you are or aren't based on how your investment's performing. And if your investment's not performing like somebody else's, guess where that pressure goes? All comes down to the CEO in the firm. So I'm under tremendous pressure running this company, and I'm trying to reconcile what does it mean to run a company under the Great Commandment. And I knew pretty quickly that it wasn't shareholder first, which, in spite of what most annual reports say, most companies are shareholder first. I even thought my primary responsibility wasn't our customers. Some companies operate customer first. I didn't feel like that's where I was called. That was my great responsibility under the Great Commandment. I felt a tremendous responsibility for our employees and their families, for their I always say their groceries, their mortgage payments, their tuition. That was the responsibility. The decisions that I made every single day affected those people and their families in profound ways. And so I ultimately decided that for us, the Great Commandment meant employee first, and that we were gonna operate our company putting employees first. So first thing I did was tell our shareholders they were not first. And you can imagine how well that went.
They said, "Oh, fantastic."
Yeah. And I just told this story last time too. So one of my board members, he's still a board member, he decided that, because I wouldn't take all their input, they wanted me to fire a guy who was 1 year from retirement, was our head of HR. 1 year from retirement, whose wife had late stage ALS. They wanted me to fire him.
You're kidding.
No. And because if you wouldn't implement their, quote, best practices. Now remember, none of these people have ever run a company before.
Right.
They wanted, here's the best practices, implement these best practices. Some of them were good, but many of them weren't, and they didn't fit for us. And so we wouldn't implement them. And there were some HR policies that we didn't implement. Like they wanted us to have, this is a silly example, but it's telling. They wanted us to have unlimited paid time off, which seems like it's a huge gift to employees.
You don't take any time.
Exactly. What they know is people take less paid time off if it's not a quantified number. If you have 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever, you'll take it. But if you have unlimited PTO, you feel guilty about taking it, and the statistics show you'll actually take less.
Wow.
That's the kind of crap these guys pull. So we just wouldn't implement some of their policies, so they're like, fire that guy. I said no. So there are a few things like that they wanted me to do I wouldn't do. So this board member decided we got to get rid of Matt. because we made this, they're a minority investor. They made this investment, they wanted to get rid of me. And I had just told them they were not number one, and they knew that this new faith was changing how I was operating the business. So this guy is the head of our audit committee. Our auditors are Ernst & Young. So he calls up Ernst & Young, and he says, I know Matt is committing fraud. The next audit is coming up. I want you to find the fraud. And if you don't find it, we're going to fire you and we're going to bring in other auditors. And at that time, we're the fastest growing technology company in Atlanta. And so we were kind of a coveted account for these accounting firms. Fortunately, the partner of this accounting firm, his daughter and my daughter went to Christian school together. So he called me and he said, hey, Matt, your board member just called me, the head of your audit committee called me and told me this. And I said, don't worry, you do your job, right? Like if I'm committing fraud, you got to find it, it's your job. But you're not going to be fired if you don't, if you do your job and you don't find fraud. So I called the managing partner of this private equity firm and said, hey, this is what just happened. He could not have cared any less. That tells you that these private equity firms.
Suggested it.
Yeah. They're rotten to the core, unfortunately. It's the money is the root of all evil, and it is so central, and they've been very successful at generating wealth. So, didn't go over well when I told them they weren't first. And then at our next customer conference, I told our customers they weren't first, that our employees were first, that we were going to put our employees first. Still lip service, by the way, to employees. We're trying to do things, but plenty of people, plenty of annual reports say we take care of employees, all that stuff. But the customers, to my surprise, loved it. Many of them reached out to me after our customer conference and, hey, can I come work for your company? And many of them have over the years. We have dozens of former customers that work for us now. So then, obviously, the employees needed to see it. And so I think the most telling example of when we had to make a decision of who we were was the pandemic. So March the 13th, Friday of 2020, probably like the rest of you, we went home. We were going to work from home for a week while this head cold blew over. And I remember as the days ticked on, it got worse and worse and worse. And so I had our chief financial officer running and rerunning the most austere outlook he could run from a revenue perspective. And they finished that, and I said, okay, now we got to go do the expenses, but we're not going to let any people go. And you can remember at that time, especially technology, people were getting shot out of a cannon. Worst time in their, like everybody's scared, they're worried about how they're going to pay their bills, and their employers are firing them. I said, we're just not doing it. Go figure out how we do this, meet this austere revenue scenario without firing people. So CFO and team ran and reran these scenarios and ultimately came back and said, we have cut everything we could cut, and we can't get there without taking out people. And I said, well, what if the management team takes a pay cut? And he went back and did the calculation and came back and said, well, we could do it, and here's how much of a cut that every manager would have to take. So March the 20th, a week after we all went home, I called a meeting, and we had 30 or 40 managers there at the time. And I said, look, here's the deal. Here's who we say we are. We say we're employee first. And I don't want to let anybody go, and I know you don't either. But this is the only way we're going to be able to do this. And so I said, I'm not telling you have to. I'm telling you I am, and this is the only way we're going to be able to do this. Proudest day of my career. Without even knowing how much of a pay cut I was asking them to take, every single person on that call, I'm in, I'll do it, I'm in. And that was the moment, right? We said we were going to live out this great commandment. That was the moment that we really did. And we took a pay cut. Fortunately, things weren't as bad as we thought they were going to be. And I was able to return everybody to their normal salaries pretty quickly, and I paid them back every penny with interest of the money that they had foregone. And they weren't all Christians. We have lots of non-Christians and Muslims and Hindus in the company. But they knew I was, and they knew we were serious about people first. So that happened, and that was a really seminal moment in our company. And word leaked out. Employees found out that we did that. And then there have been many little things since then that allow us to reinforce it. The latest is right now. With AI, most tech companies are cutting people really heavily. We've told people we're not cutting people. We have AI products. We're heavily implementing AI in the company. And what we said is we're just going to grow without adding people. We're not going to cut people. And we're fully remote company because our employees after the pandemic said, we want to stay remote, and it worked great. We were more profitable. We were growing faster. Seemed to work, so we stayed remote. So there have been a lot of large and small things I think we've done to really prove that we mean that we put people first. Now, here's the most remarkable thing about the Great Commandment, and my biggest lesson from this whole exercise. My non-Christian investors, when they're honest, they would tell you that they don't knowingly make investments in Christian-led companies because they don't think Christians can make the tough decisions. They, like I believe, think Christians are weak and they need something to believe in, and they can't do all the hard things like firing the head of HR whose wife has ALS, end-stage ALS. We are the most valuable company in all of our private equity investors' portfolios. We're top decile performer in every category financially in all of their portfolios. Incredible. And it's not magic. It is because we live out the Great Commandment. And it's what I've found with our employees, many of whom are Christian, many of whom are not. They know we have their backs. They know they don't need to keep their LinkedIn profile up to date, and they're keeping an ear out for a job. A weird thing we found is that an employee-employer relationship is a lot like a romantic relationship. That once you check in and you decide you want that relationship, you'll fight for it.
Yeah. And
the way that manifests in our company is our employees just pull on the oars harder. It's not any more than that. They pull on the oars harder, and we don't make less mistakes than anybody else. But this last week, I was with the chief operating officer of United Healthcare, one of our biggest customers. And he said, "You're one of our favorite vendors, maybe our favorite vendor."
How about that?
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
We're certainly not the largest. And the reason is, not because we make less mistakes. I think we've got a great product, but plenty of people have great products. It's because when there is a mistake, they don't have to call us and ask us to stay up all night fixing it. My people feel a responsibility to this relationship that they have that they don't want to lose because of the Great Commandment, because we put them first. They pull on the oars harder. It's not any more complicated than that. And as a result, in every category, we outperform our peers. So the greatest lesson for me so far in operating our business is that, God's law doesn't stop at the door of our shop, even if we work from home. And I feel that in business in particular, as Christians, we walk in and we pluck that apple off the tree and take a big old bite before we walk into the office. We trust God in our families and our homes, but we don't trust Him in our businesses. And it grieves God's heart, in my opinion, when we bite that apple on the way into work every day and say, "God, I got this." And that there is, God's principles invade every area of our lives, including our businesses, if we just unleash Him. So that was my greatest lesson so far, and wheels could come off in the morning, but the Great Commandment, people first, has played out. And we win all that accolades. If you go to our website, you'd see all the culture awards and employee awards and great places to work and all that stuff. But I think for me, I wanted to demonstrate that you could put people first and live out the great commandment and the Great Commission, which I'll talk about in just a second, and be wildly successful financially and outperform our secular peers, which we have done, and my investors have had to admit begrudgingly. It gives me great satisfaction, by the way, to hear them talk at their conferences now about people first. And of course, they probably don't mean it the same way that we mean it.
It's people first if you're making the money that we want you to
Right,
make, right?
right. And then if that doesn't work, we're gonna go back
Are
to,
these
sure.
private equity companies giving these SOPs now? Employers?
No, they won't go that far.
Yeah.
But they will.
Just people first, but don't actually
Yeah,
do
yeah,
the
yeah.
stuff he did.
Yeah.
It's too risky.
They will, have us speak at their conferences, and it's hard to deny the results quarter after quarter, year after year. And again, we're not perfect. We have bad quarters, but generally speaking, we perform consistently. And when we come up against challenges, like how AI is reshaping our company, I have every confidence in the world that our employees are going to rise to the challenge because of they're so committed and checked into the business.
Give us some more background, the kind of products you have.
Oh, yeah.
Employees
Yep.
and all
Yep.
that good
So
stuff.
it's automation software for large information workforces. So
For example.
So a lot of our customers all of our customers are they're brands you'd hear of, you'd know. They're all big banks, big insurers, big telecoms with these big information workforces. Claims processors, call center agents, even clinicians, doctors, nurses, pharmacists, anybody that works a queue of activity. So even a doctor works a queue of activity in an office. They tend to be, if you think about it from a supply and demand perspective, they tend to be poorly allocated. My wife says my love language is math. And so to me, it's just this giant math problem for a company like United Healthcare that's got about 100,000 employees on our product. Figuring out, given the demand that you and I put on the brands we do business with is so dynamic, figuring out how to deploy that workforce in a way that is most effective for customers and most efficient for the business, it's just a giant math problem. It's a really hard math problem. It's one I've patented. We have 20-something patents. But that's essentially what we do, figure out based on what's going on in real time in any of these large banks or insurance companies or telecoms, how to deploy their workforce in pursuit of the goals of the organization, whether that's customer satisfaction or cost or revenue or cross sales or whatever it might be. So all brands you know and know well, they're all household names for the most part that are our customers. And started in automation, and like everybody else, we now have AI products as well. Like, for example, using all the data that flows through our platform, we can predict with a high degree of accuracy when employees are going to attrit. So we can predict with 80% confidence before somebody quits, which can be very, very expensive in these knowledge worker jobs to retrain people to have all that knowledge again. And so give people an opportunity to try to head off that attrition before it happens. All the body language is in the data. You just needed to train a model to recognize the body language before it happens. So that's an example of one of our AI products. So Great Commission, so that was Great Commandment. Great Commission, as I shared this prayer breakfast, I got to share my testimony from the stage. I got to become the MC of this event. I got to see it from the inside for 15 years and be on the board. So so many people, business people generally that were a part of this, would say to this person that founded this prayer breakfast, like, this thing works. Like, we get to see hundreds of people give their lives to Christ. We get a front row seat to life change. It's amazing. Like, so people would go to this event and hear speakers, and there would be an invitation, and people would give their lives to Christ. But even if it wasn't your moment, we developed this off-ramp of these Bible studies, and we had dozens of Bible studies all over town people would go to, and still do. And I mean, the life change was incredible. And we would go to this, the guy that founded it, and say, we need to expand this. It was focused on the tech industry only, by the way, in Atlanta. Here, it's the one we've created here is general business, but We said, we need to expand to other industries and other cities. And he would say, that's not what God called me to. God bless him. He was committed to what he believed God called him to. And he'd say, if you want to do it, you do it. And so people would kind of slunk away like, I don't want to go do this by myself. So, but anyway, this thing worked. And I always tell people, so I said there are 126 evangelical college ministries. You can probably name them, right? Cru and Young Life and Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and it's easy. Name 3 evangelical workplace ministries. You can't do it. And so there's this giant gap in the marketplace. And again, this was the stupid part for me, that I was really slow in the uptake. God had resourced me and blessed me in ways I had never expected in my wildest dreams, financially. And with all this experience, being a part of this prayer breakfast and seeing it from the inside and seeing what God was doing in this ministry. And then during the pandemic, when our employees, when we all went to work from home, we decided to do the pandemic from our beach house in Atlantic Beach. And then when the pandemic was over and my employees wanted to stay remote, my wife wanted to stay at the beach.
Smart woman.
Yeah. So we fell in love with Jacksonville, and so we decided to stay here. And God really began to work on me that he had given me all this experience, and he'd resourced me and given me this wisdom for a reason. I was still too slow on the uptake to get it. And I actually thought it was politics. I thought, okay, God, the world is short on principled leaders. That's where you're calling me. And my wife was like, please don't. Please don't put our family through this.
Smart woman.
Yeah. So that's what I thought. In spite of the fact God had given me all this amazing experience, and I had seen dozens of my coworkers give their lives to Christ through this thing. I had given my life to Christ through this thing, and the model worked. I'm going, okay, God, what do you want me to do? And so as the guy that I had hired to be the CEO went on, retired. I became the CEO, and on the way out, he said to me, he knew how ambitious I was. And I hadn't yet figured out the answer to the question, but he said to me, what can you do today that will matter in 10,000 years? And I now have that question on a printed card next to my computer. What can you do today that will matter in 10,000 years? So I'm a super ambitious entrepreneur guy, and I'm thinking, what can I build? What company can I build? What technology, what thing will matter in 10,000 years? And I think many of us are fascinated with Elon Musk today, but it's been 15 years since Steve Jobs died, and we barely remember him.
Yep.
We won't remember Elon Musk in 10,000 years, whoever's here or there, wherever it is.
Howard Hughes, nobody
Yeah.
knows too much.
I think about 10,000 years. So I really wrestled with that question. Again, I'm a little slow on the uptake, but ultimately I figured out that the only thing that I can do today or any day that will matter in 10,000 years is affect somebody's eternity. It's the only thing that will matter.
That's right.
And so that became my driving force. So we used this prayer breakfast. I saw, as I said, lots of my coworkers give their lives to Christ. I got the front row seat to life change. This prayer breakfast in Atlanta continues. But when I came here, I took a sabbatical when I felt like God was calling me out. And I said, I'm going away. I'm taking my Bible and my journals, and I'm not coming back until I have an answer. And fortunately, God gave me an answer pretty quickly. I came back in a couple of weeks, and it was clear that God had prepared me and gifted me and resourced me to take this prayer breakfast and try to scale it to other cities. So the First Coast Prayer Breakfast is on October the 6th at the Prime Osborne Convention Center. And I reserved the second largest room in Jacksonville, and I think my faith wasn't big enough. I should have gotten the biggest room because we sold out of tables in no time. So the model is Christians invite their colleagues who may not have a relationship with Jesus. They get tables and invite their colleagues to come to this breakfast and hear amazing speakers. And so I think in 27 we'll either get a bigger room or do multiple breakfasts in a year. But the event sold out really quickly. Overwhelmed with
How many tables
sponsorships.
is it?
There are 46 tables.
Oh, 46.
Yeah. Overwhelmed with sponsors. It's been amazing, the sponsors that have come around this event. God's really, really blessed it. We need volunteers if you're
How
interested.
many people at the table?
8 to 10.
Oh, okay.
So if you're interested or you know somebody who might be, there are going to be people like me that walk in that door that are uncomfortable, that are worried about a prayer or anything. And our volunteers are there. There's several teams. There's a welcome team. There's a registration team. There's a prayer team Sandra's going to be a part of. It's to have all the details melt into the background so they can hear the woman at the well story from the stage and connect it with their own lives. Post prayer breakfast, there's a 6-week Bible study called Path to Purpose. There's 6 different CEOs in the Jacksonville area that are going to each one lead a different week, so that the people coming out of that prayer breakfast, there'll be people there who it's their moment. God's drawing them right now, and they'll give their lives to Christ there that moment and that morning. There'll be others that aren't ready yet, but they want to know more, and so they'll join our Path to Purpose Bible studies. And Jacksonville is Rusty, the CEO I hired, used to say, "How do you make $1 million and pay no taxes? First, make $1 million." So God's telling me not to look past the First Coast Prayer Breakfast and think about other cities. But
Who said that? Rusty?
God.
Oh, God
God's
told
telling
you.
me not to look past. Yeah. So we're going to have this event and then and pull it off for God's glory, and then we'll start thinking about other cities. Nashville and Birmingham have raised their hands. There's one coming out of the ground in Austin, Texas. There's one already out of the ground in Dallas. There's one that's been around for a while in Washington, D.C. and Silicon Valley that are kind of waning, that we hope to have some influence over. The idea is to...
Seattle has one.
Do they? Evangelical Prayer Breakfast? That's fantastic.
Every year.
The idea is for the cities that don't have it, it's a heavy lift, but to simulcast it from the First Coast to these other cities on the morning of the event. So,
I was thinking about that. If you're
Yeah.
already out of room, you could talk to 1122. They've got that simulcast.
yeah, they do. They do.
Yeah.
And a reach.
Yeah, the COO is a table host, the 1122 COO, Sean. So
So if the Prime Osborne is the second biggest meeting space, what's the biggest?
Prime Osborne's, I got both ballrooms at Prime Osborne, it'll hold about 500 people. The biggest space is also Prime Osborne, but it's the convention space, and that holds 4,000. And so maybe I should have had more faith and committed to 4,000 for the first year, but I didn't. So it's a big jump from 500 to 4,000, and then
It was a fleece.
yeah, that's right.
It was a
That's right.
fleece.
A test. And the next biggest one is ViStar. So, but again, first
So,
make $1 million.
Let me ask a couple of questions. Can
Sure.
I? Then you guys can pop in with questions too. But so on the private equity group, how many individuals are involved, or how many companies are involved, and then how do they exit? Okay, do you have to go public? Do you have to do an ESOP or some other methodology for them to exit? When do they want to exit? How fast is that taking them there? And then, more examples of products, software, like you told about, productivity. That's my word, but not yours. But performance from the call centers and things like that.
Yeah. So private equity tends to have a hold period of 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, that's what I was
no
thinking.
longer than 10.
Yeah. And how long have you been with them?
9 years. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The anniversary's coming up. Huh?
No. Sorry. 26, 15. Yeah, 9 years, 10 years.
Okay.
Of the private equity group, it's just so problematic.